Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Patryk Witkowski and I'm joined today by Richard Thomson, a former SNP MP for Gordon. Lovely to have you. Hello.
Great to be back here.
For our first story, per usual, we're starting with a Ukraine update, day 1075 of a conflict. Donald Trump's Ukraine envoy hinted that both sides would have to make concessions to end the war, which could include Kiev giving up land occupied by Russia. Keith Kellogg told Fox News that, quote, both sides will give a little bit. Zelensky has, quote, already indicated he will soften his position on land. The retired lieutenant general said, adding that Putin is, quote, going to have to soften his positions as well. But Ukrainian communications advisor dismissed Kellogg's intervention, saying, we haven't seen Mr. Kellogg's full interview, but if his plan is just a ceasefire and elections, it is a failed plan. Putin won't be intimidated by just those two things, Dmytro Litvin told journalists. Trump's threat of sanctions has left Vladimir Putin rattled and concerned about the Russian economy. Sir Keir Starmer has said ahead of an informal European defense cooperation meeting in Brussels on Monday. Starmer said it was necessary to, quote, see all allies stepping up, particularly in Europe, when it comes to inflicting economic harm on Russia, and argued it would help bring about peace by ending the Ukraine war sooner. Sir Keir Starmer said, President Trump has threatened more sanctions on Russia, and it's clear that's got Putin rattled. We know that he's worried about the state of the Russian economy, he ended his quote by saying. Kiev and Moscow traded blame on Sunday for a strike on a school in a Ukrainian-occupied town in Russia's Kursk region. The Ukrainian Air Force said 4 people were killed on Saturday in a Russian-guided aerial bomb attack on a former school building sheltering civilians in the town of Zudza. 4 others were seriously wounded and 80 people rescued from the rubble, it added. A Ukrainian drone attack sparked fires at an oil refinery in Russia's Volgograd region that have since been contained. The administration of the southern Russian region cited the governor as saying on Monday, Russia's air defense units intercepted and destroyed 70 Ukrainian drones overnight, the Russian Defense Ministry said on Monday in its Telegram messaging app, including 25 drones in Volgograd. Ukrainian prosecutors charged 2 men on Sunday over the killing of an army draft officer in the central Poltava region, leading a top general to call for swift punishment as he warned of growing disrespect towards members of the military. One of the suspects, who was being driven to a military training center on Friday with other conscripts, called an acquaintance who then arrived at the scene and was shot dead by one of the accompanying officers. Sorry, I'll just read that again. One of the suspects, who was driven to a military training center on Friday with other conscripts, called an acquaintance who then arrived at the scene and shot dead one of the accompanying officers, the prosecutor's general's office alleged. 2 suspects were arrested a few hours later, the office said in a statement, adding that police had seized a hunting rifle, ammunition, and 2 cases of hand grenades from the alleged shooter. Separately, an explosion near a recruitment center for Ukrainian military on Sunday wounded 1 person, police said. Richard, moving to you, we're getting more and more talk of peace talks or potential ceasefire talks from the region. How do you sense the temperature of these from what you can tell from the outside?
It's very difficult to say. I mean, clearly, everything is thrown up in the air by the election and assumption to office of President Trump. He said he could sort it out in a day. I don't think anybody seriously believed them, and surprise, surprise, it's not sorted out in a day. But nevertheless, I think there's a great deal of uncertainty with the way he's trying to throw some weight about over trade tariffs. and things like that, that clearly the rules-based international order is not something that he has a huge amount of respect for. The word that seems to be used about him at the moment when people try to put bows and ties on his behaviour is that he is transactional. So I'm really not sure what, if anything, that is going to come of any peace talks that are there, because in order to enforce a peace or bring about a peace that is even broadly on the kind of terms that might be acceptable to the Ukrainians and on the less harmful side of where things could land, it's going to need a resolute United States backing up the Ukrainians and upholding as much of the territorial integrity as can possibly be achieved. So, I think the Russians will be looking to see what gaps there are and fissures in the Western alliance, and it's all, it is very much up in the air at the moment. There is certainly nothing that I can see that is leading me towards thinking that there's any kind of outcome to this, equitable otherwise, as things stand.
Thank you, Richard. You mentioned Trump's potential disregard for international rules-based order. As one of our later stories might touch into, it might be a disregard for the domestic rule-based order as well, but that will be coming up later. As for now, we will be covering the Middle East updates. At least 47,518 Palestinians have been killed and 111,612 wounded in Gaza since the 7th of October 2023, according to the Gaza Health Authority. Gaza's government media office said on Sunday that the death toll rises to 61,709 people killed in Gaza when the 14,222 who remain missing under the rubble are added. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is expected to begin talks today on brokering a second phase of a ceasefire with Hamas, his office has said, as he visits the new Trump administration in Washington. Ahead of his departure, Netanyahu told reporters he would discuss, quote, victory over Hamas, without defining what that would mean in practical terms, contending with Iran and freeing all hostages when he meets with the U.S. president on Tuesday. Hamas is ready to begin talks on the details of a second phase of the ongoing truce in Gaza, two officials from a Palestinian militant group told agency France Press on Monday, saying Hamas has informed the mediators during ongoing communications and meetings held with Egyptian mediators last week in Cairo, and we are ready to start the negotiations for the second phase, one official said, on conditions of anonymity, going on to say, we are waiting for the mediators to initiate the next round of negotiation. The head of Amnesty International, Agnes Callamard, says Israel must be held accountable for the, quote, genocide that has been committed, adding that the current ceasefire must not mean that we forget what happened over the last 15 months, saying that, quote, in fact, if you have any sense of a future, you need a reckoning for the past. Amnesty's primary message is that genocide has been committed and accountability must be delivered for it, the Secretary General told Al Jazeera. Palestinian news agency Wafa reported that the Israeli military is continuing its raid on the West Bank city of Jenin for the 14th consecutive day, which the outlet says has killed at least 25 Palestinian people, injured dozens of others, and has involved the demolition of dozens of homes. The Office of Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has said the ongoing Israeli military operation in the occupied West Bank amounts to, quote, ethnic cleansing, and urged the U.S. to intervene. In a statement, spokesperson Nabil Abu Rudaini has said the presidency condemned the occupation authorities' expansion of their comprehensive war on our Palestinian people in the West Bank to implement their plans aimed at displacing citizens and ethnic cleansing. The Palestinian Ministry of Health says the Israeli military have killed at least 70 people, including 10 children in the West Bank since the beginning of 2025. 38 were killed in Jenin, 15 in Tubas, 6 in Nablus, 5 in Tulkarem, 3 in Hebron, 2 in Bethlehem, and 1 in Jerusalem. A car bomb killed at least 15 people in the northern Syrian city of Manbij on Monday. The attack is the second there in 3 days. Syria's deadliest since Bashar al-Assad was unseated from power in December 2024. No one has claimed responsibility for the car bombing in the relatively small city located 30 kilometers, 19 miles, from the Turkish border. Richard, I'm going to ask you for a sort of general take of what you make of the Middle East situation, but I'll also ask about these talks, since they're topical, between Netanyahu and Trump. How much pressure do you expect to be put on the Israeli side in terms of any sort of negotiations from the Trump administration? Do you think that they'll be getting mostly a free pass? Do you think there is going to be significant pressure there because Trump wants to be seen as the peace negotiator? How do you see that? And feel free to comment on some of the other Middle Eastern stories here as well.
No, I'll keep it brief. To be honest, the Israeli government has been able to do what it's done over the last few months in Gaza and increasingly the West Bank because it fears no consequence to its actions. It knows that its backers will always supply the military support that it needs and the diplomatic cover that they feel they require. And while I'm given to understand that there isn't a wonderful personal relationship between Trump and Netanyahu, Netanyahu will be trying to sniff out Trump to see what version of Donald Trump he's getting. And while I'm fairly sure that on balance, President Trump would prefer there to be no conflict than for there to be ongoing conflict, if only for the reflection it might give him if he were able to present himself as being in some way the man who brought it all to a halt. I don't expect that situation of the lack of leverage being exerted on the Israeli government that could be exerted continuing. That lack of leverage continuing. And I'm really not sure that there's a great deal more I can say on that at this moment in time, other than to, like everybody else, who wait with some amount of trepidation to see what, if anything, emerges in the public communiques after the meeting that both men have tomorrow.
Thank you, Richard. Taking a look to the UK, where Shona Robison calls on Labour to back the Scottish Government budget. The dividing line in Scottish politics is between parties who want to get things done and parties who don't. Finance Secretary Shona Robison has said, as pressure grows on Labour to give the Scottish Government's budget. The budget currently has agreement from the Liberal Democrats and the Greens, with Labour's current position that they would abstain ahead of a Stage 1 vote on Tuesday. The budget provides record funding for the NHS, reflecting the First Minister's focus on driving improvements in the health service, as well as reinstating winter support for pensioners and increased investment in housing. Scottish Government Finance Secretary Shona Robison has said the following: "The key dividing line in this Parliament is now between parties who want to get things done and make progress for Scotland and the parties who don't. We know where the Tories stand. They have no interest in getting things done, but Labour are currently abstaining, and they need to decide what side they are on. Do they want to stand up for the NHS, or do they want to stand with the Tories? Parties in the Parliament have managed to come together to have sensible, grown-up discussions and come to agreements and make a difference to the lives of the people of Scotland. Meanwhile, Labour find themselves standing with the Tories on the political sidelines. This budget will provide record funding for our health service, ensuring we can deliver 150,000 additional appointments every year and make it easier for people to see their GP. Parliament has a chance to unite behind their plans to improve the NHS, and Labour will be haunted every day until 2026 if they choose to stand with the Tories rather than standing with the health service." Richard, can you get yourself in the mind of Labour here? Why abstain? Is this is this a political issue? Is this just playing party politics, or is this something more meaningful? Where's the abstaining coming from? Where's the contention with the budget?
Oh, I don't think it's got anything at all to do with the budget, and I think it's more to do with the deep ingrained, hardwired into their DNA hashtag SNP battery that the party there's a significant element of the Labour Party in Scotland that has never got over the fact that they lost control of the government in Scotland to the SNP back in 2007. They still see the SNP as somehow being interlopers, and they believe themselves to have a monopoly of concern on the Scottish interest and on issues of social justice. And that has absolutely curdled the view that the party takes, and it no longer seems to be able to decide for itself what it is that it wishes to do, except in terms of triangulating or in contradistinction to where it thinks the SNP is. But if we go back a few months, I think we're, to the general election, Labour, even though it was a mathematical nonsense to argue this point, they managed to do very, very well in Scotland by arguing that only Labour could get the Tories out, despite the fact that the SNP already had got the Tories out in most of Scotland, and it was only the SNP who could get rid of the remaining Tories. But, of course, what Labour argued quite with some success was that if you elected Labour MPs from Scotland, you wouldn't be electing an opposition like you were with the SNP, you would be electing a government. And from that, they thought that their branch manager in Scotland, Anna Sarwar, was then on a gilded path into Bute House and government in Scotland. By 2026 at the latest, or potentially with the implosion of the Bute House agreement between the SNP and the Scottish Green Party on a shorter timescale, perhaps triggered by the failure of the Scottish Parliament to pass a budget. Now, what has happened since then is that clearly the Labour Party in London has made a complete mess of things. It has squandered a lot of political capital, and it has dropped in support on both sides of the border. The poll figures make for pretty horrendous reading for anyone who would be cheering for a Labour victory. Now, what that has done is the SNP has moved up slightly, but the Labour Party vote has imploded to a very large extent in Scotland, to the extent that we're now seeing opinion polls, and I know we'll perhaps come on to this later, showing that if an election were to be held tomorrow, the SNP would emerge once again as the largest party by quite some margin. So other parties, the Greens and the Lib Dems, for varying motivations, have chosen to engage with the budget. Ironically, both of those parties, were there to be an early election, would either stand still or perhaps, in the case of the Greens, maybe advance slightly. But they've decided that the best thing to do at this point in time is to agree a budget. And both parties have managed to have some successes in terms of securing priorities that are important to them. And the Greens in terms of school meals free school meals for those in S1 to 3 who qualify, and in the case of the Lib Dems, they've been particularly forthright in seeking to secure particular capital investments in the NHS. Labour, on the other hand, haven't come to the table with anything. They failed to react. They failed to come to terms with the fact that people are looking at them in Scotland not as a potential government in waiting. And because the Labour Party cannot be seen, and Anna Sarwar is not confident enough to do a deal with the SNP, he set himself up to oppose the budget. And I think that the coup de grace for it was when the Scottish Finance Secretary, Shona Robison, said that given that the UK Labour government wasn't going to end the bedroom tax, the rape clause, or restore reverse its policy in the winter fuel payment, which is at the root of much of Labour's political difficulties both sides of the border, that the Scottish government would do that. That basically left Labour with nowhere to go on their own terms. Now, they're now in the stupid position of, frankly, calling for, lauding themselves for the Barnett formula doing exactly what it's supposed to do, but unwilling to make any of the decisions or the choices about what they would be willing to support, because they want to be in favour of good things and against bad things. They don't want to make any choices. They're not willing to get around the table. And frankly, I think they're making themselves look pretty abject, because this far out from an election, you want to be portraying your spokespeople as ministers in waiting. You want to be able to say, have at least 5 or 6 key priorities that you want to get stuck into people's minds before they go to cast their votes at the next Scottish elections. And you can do that most effectively through the budget process. And the fact that we don't know what Labour would stand for, we don't know what they would do, even if, God forbid, they were in control of this budget process, I think speaks volumes about them and none of it good. So simply by their inability to think on their feet, their lack of any kind of strategy, and this hardwired arrogance that they and they alone have a divine right to rule Scotland is what has landed them in this position. And it's why nobody seems to be buying shares in Anas Sarwar any longer as a potential First Minister for Scotland.
Thank you, Richard. That was a lot of insight there. And as you mentioned, we will be getting into that poll story in a bit. And there's going to be a lot of stories here talking about the Labour SNP dynamics. So a lot to get into for your perspective and insight there. For example, with this story, where Labour's GB Energy 1,000 jobs in Aberdeen promise could take 20 years. The SNP has responded to the GB Energy CEO, who admitted that Sir Keir Starmer's pledge for 1,000 jobs for Aberdeen could take up to 20 years, by saying that, quote, the Labour Party can't be trusted to keep its election pledges. SNP Westminster leader Stephen Flynn said it was yet another broken promise from Keir Starmer, and challenged the Prime Minister to, quote, come clean over why he is failing to deliver the promises he made at the election and admit whether these pledges are being kicked into the long grass. The Aberdeen South MP warned the UK government is failing to deliver the scale of investment needed to maximise Scotland's potential as a renewable energy powerhouse, and pointed to the fact that the Chancellor's economy speech failed to announce any new investment for Scotland. During the election, the Labour Party promised it would reduce household energy bills by £300, but instead, energy bills have risen twice under the Labour government, with average bills up by around £150, followed by a hike in the price cap in October and January. Last week, the Chancellor's speech on the economy included no new investment for Scotland, and one of the first acts of the Labour government was to scrap the £800 million of funding for Edinburgh for the development of an exascale supercomputer at Edinburgh University. Commenting, SNP Westminster leader Stephen Flynn MP said, this is yet another broken promise from Keir Starmer, and it shows the Labour Party can't be trusted to keep its election pledges. The Labour Party promised voters £300 off their energy bills and 1,000 new jobs in Aberdeen, but instead energy bills have gone up by £150 and job losses are rising across the UK thanks to the national insurance tax hike. There was no new investment for Scotland in the Chancellor's plan for the economy. It was all centred on the south of England, which shows Scotland isn't a priority for Westminster. Scotland was promised change, but instead we're getting more of the same Westminster failure. Richard, Labour is being called out for not living up to certain election promises. Do you think these election promises were put out as lies? Do you think things are going off course? Or is this something they plan to complete in the rest of their term? How do you interpret this?
Lie is a very strong word, but I think it was, let's just settle on an empty promise. Because I'm feeling generous tonight. Look, Labour went into the election talking about GB Energy as a thing it was going to not only invest and pump prime investment in renewables, it was going to own generation, it was going to facilities, it was going to generate energy and electricity, and it was going to reduce bills. Now, the idea that any organisation was going to do all of these things was just never flew. And you could speak to 10 different Labour spokespeople in the election and get 10 different answers about what GB Energy was actually supposed to be being set up to do. And by and large, they got away with it. Scotland's media let them away with it because, they were backing the winners as they saw it. Now, of course, in the northeast of Scotland, or in the oil and gas industry is very important to us, as well as renewables. But Labour's pledge not to license any new oil and gas is something that's putting 100,000 jobs potentially at risk, not just in the northeast, but right across the UK. And GB Energy was going to be the panacea that would sort all of this and, of course, reduce energy bills. Well, now we know that energy bills aren't going to be reduced by GB Energy or anything else this Labour government does. Bills are going to go up. We also know that we're not going to get the number of jobs promised, and now we're finding out it's an extended timescale even to get the 1,000 jobs for the institution that was going to, remember, help save a lot of those 100,000 jobs through the energy transition. They still, as I understand it, want to capitalise that GB Energy entity with their ongoing tax raid on the North Sea oil and gas sector. And I just think I'm going to say, this is what I was saying during the election, nothing has happened since then to change it. I think that they are in danger of choking off the investment we need in renewables without and also choking off the oil and gas industry as well, and giving us a cliff edge where it should be a transition. And they'll choke off the oil and gas industry and strangle renewables at birth with this, because they simply, it was a convenient soundbite, it was a fig leaf, there was no plan behind it. And the plans that are emerging are not unworthy, but they are nothing like the scale in terms of producing jobs it was promised, and it will have nothing like the impact that was promised in our economy in terms of the help it will give, the push it will give to the energy transition. And let's be honest, it's absolutely nothing like the scale of the transformation that we need if we are to get that transition on a time scale that can protect jobs and get us to net zero at the rate that we need to get there. So some people would call it lies. Certainly, I think people were badly missold it. But at the heart, they simply went into this with a soundbite and a name for an entity in GB Energy with absolutely no idea, no agreement on what it was going to do or how it was even going to do it. And this is the inevitable result. And it's not just Aberdeen in the northeast of Scotland that's been shortchanged. Ultimately, it's everyone.
Thank you. Now for a story on international trade, where Sir Keir Starmer, while in Brussels, refused to come off the fence over EU and US trade. Speaking at a press conference in Brussels with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, Keir Starmer has insisted that he does not think it will be necessary for the UK to choose between the US and the EU. Later this evening, he will become the first PM since Brexit to attend a European Council dinner with all the EU leaders. Starmer remained non-committal after President Trump contrasted the, quote, nice treatment he was getting from Starmer with the atrocity, quote, of the EU. In comments that implied Trump wants to force the UK to side with the US as the price for avoiding tariffs. The SNP has said that small steps won't cut it when it comes to resetting relations with the EU, and that a return to the EU single market and customs union must be put on the agenda at this evening's summit. SNP Europe spokesperson Stephen Geffens MP said the following: It is welcome that Keir Starmer is the first UK Prime Minister to attend one of these EU summits since the madness of Brexit. But the welcome symbolism of the attendance is no substitute for substance. When it comes to re-engaging and renewing relations with the European Union, small steps won't cut it. Returning to the EU single market and the customs union is the only route to recovery and the only pathway to growth. That's why Keir Starmer must put it on the agenda tonight. Reversing the damage of Brexit by reintegrating our economy with the EU was always urgent, but it has now become an absolute necessity with the prospect of Trump tariffs. With the world facing an even more turbulent time, with tariffs and protectionism on the rise, it is an absolute no-brainer to be part of the largest single market in the world. Being part of, at the very least, the EU single market and the customs union is the best protection and best security for Scotland and the rest of the UK. Mr. Gevins added, if Labour continues to put a roadblock on the way, the people of Scotland will rightly decide that our interests and our future are best served as an independent European nation. Richard, the talk of tariffs is obviously going to be a very hot button issue over the coming weeks. Some people thought that maybe it was a big ruse of Trump's election campaign and wouldn't come through. It seems like they are now. Do you expect Trump to use this as a very definite and direct bargaining chip on Britain, pushing for this choice between EU and US? Or on the other end, do you think the EU might do a rallying cry to the UK and rally our tariffs versus the US? Is this going to be an ongoing important issue for us?
Well, it'll be an ongoing important issue, but I don't think Trump particularly cares that much about the UK in this. To be honest, in fact, with all this talk of tariffs, I'm still not convinced that it's got anything much to do with trade. If you look at the news that's broken in the last couple of hours about pausing the imposition of tariffs in Mexico, it seems to have been designed to secure leave. It seems to have been. It seems to be aimed more at gaining some political leverage over issues like migration and other border related issues with Mexico. So,
Richard, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. If I could just interrupt you for a very small moment. Let's focus more on like the UK part of the tariff story here, because we do have a more US
that's exactly.
I'm very sorry.
That's exactly what I'm about to do.
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
If we could have right. Thank you. That's exactly what I'm trying to do here, because I'm saying it's got nothing to do with trade. It's about other issues. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're seeing with Canada. So that's why I don't think it's an issue in terms of trade with the UK or necessarily the EU. It's about what else he wants out of that. Now, I think the UK is in the worst of all worlds. It is, here it is, it's distanced itself from the European Union. There's no prospect of a trade deal with the US, and there are three main economic poles in the world. There's Europe, there's the US, and there's China. So which one? Now, Labour, in terms of trying to reset its economic strategy, says it wants to reset the relationship with China. It wants to have a reset the relationship with Europe, and it wants to work closely with the US administration in Washington. Well, it can't have all three. At best, it can only have one of those things. And right now, I think that the UK is isolated. And if Trump does come calling with the threat of tariffs, all tariffs will make both sides poorer, but it will not be on any kind of, if he gets an equalisation or a greater equalisation of trade out of it, that's a pleasing byproduct. But it will be in order to try and force some other kind of political concession. That's certainly my reading of it, with Mexico, with Canada, and also in terms of the threats being made about the European Union. But as we've seen with a pretty robust response that the Canadian government under under Justin Trudeau, has given, and the response from the Americans that the Canadians have apparently misread his intentions, I think there's clearly another subtext here. It's got very little to do with trade. But I don't think, if we go into this armed with discussions about what we can do trade-wise, it will be something else that is on the agenda. And I think we just have to sit this one out until Trump's true agenda on this becomes clear.
Thank you, Richard. And just as a small little addition to that story, if the EU does start engaging in retaliatory tariffs, do you expect them to ask the UK to join in to those retaliatory tariffs alongside them?
No. Look, I think that it's good that Starmer is at his thing at this dinner tonight. It's progress. It's better. That kind of jaw is certainly better than the war that we saw under the Conservatives. I think that there's clearly a long way to go in terms of any kind of potential realignment between the UK and the EU. The most obvious one that would be of benefit to all sides is some kind of sanitary and phytosanitary deal on food and drink products, because the amount of red tape that has crept into the exports since Brexit in terms of exporting food and drink products from the UK to the EU is astronomical. I mean, it's crippling food and drink exporters in the UK, and it's also one of the major causes of the frictions in the trade border that now still exists between the UK, between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So if you get that sanitary and phytosanitary deal in place, as Labour have said before the election they were very keen to do, you get rid of many of the snags that are there on that GB Northern Ireland trade border, and you once again ensure more or less the free movement of agricultural and food and drink products between the UK and the EU. There's other issues there. I think the Germans are clearly very strong and on matters like having visas for students and young people. I can't for the life of me understand why we wouldn't want to sign up for that, other than that Labour are absolutely petrified that they're going to get hammered by Reform and the Tories about simply opening the doors to more immigration. But that's clearly something that Europe wants, is to have that cultural flow of people once again for young people and students particularly. There's other issues there around about the creative industries, making it easier for musicians once again to tour. All of that is relatively low-hanging fruit. It comes at relatively low cost, but it would undo a great deal of the economic, social, cultural damage that's been caused by Brexit. But I think Starmer still doesn't really know what he wants out of that. He's worried about the implications of his choices, whichever direction he goes in. So I don't expect to see any rapid progress on any of these fronts. But the very fact that he's at this prime ministerial meeting of heads of government, and they're even talking about this, is progress of a sort, and long may it continue.
Thank you. As mentioned earlier, there's a new poll which shows that the next Holyrood election would return a pro-independence majority of MSPs. New Find Out Now poll commissioned by the Herald has shown the SNP is expected to return to government in Holyrood in 2026, alongside 74 pro-independence MSPs, the largest ever pro-independence majority in Holyrood. The poll has also shows Labour shrinking to just 16 MSPs, their lowest ever number in the Scottish Parliament. Commenting, SNP MSP Keith Brown said the following: "I welcome this opinion poll, which, if replicated in the Scottish election in May 2026, would see the SNP return to government alongside the largest pro-independence majority the Scottish Parliament has ever seen, of 74 MSPs. Meanwhile, Labour's support would shrink to just 16 MSPs, their worst ever result in a Scottish Parliament election. Support for Labour is imploding, and it's hardly surprising given their betrayal of so many people, through axing the winter fuel payment, maintaining the two-child cap, hiking national insurance for charities and businesses, refusing compensation for WASPy women, and skyrocketing energy prices. Labour can promise plenty of in an election, but they cannot deliver in government. If Labour can't be trusted in London, they can't be trusted in Edinburgh. Only the SNP will always put Scotland's interests first." Richard, how could the SNP maintain this sort of a poll and potentially election lead until 2026? And what do you make of this polling as a whole?
I think the poll is one that's encouraging, not just for the SNP, but for supporters of independence more generally. But I think that while it's encouraging for the SNP, that support has gone up. I think it's clear that the SNP is still some way off the levels of support it has enjoyed at previous Holyrood elections. So there's some way to go here, and I think one of the key takeaways is how the unionist vote is splitting with the impact of Reform taking votes not just from the Conservatives but also from the Labour Party, particularly it would seem in parts of central Scotland. So, that's like kryptonite to the Labour vote and Labour hopes of winning many SNP constituency, currently SNP held constituency seats across central Scotland. And of course, if their list vote is down when you get a party like the Greens that traditionally does well on the list, then they're going to, that it's clear there's a lot of competition for list places, and the inbuilt advantage that first past the post gives the party that's in the lead in that election is the SNP continues to benefit from that. So I think that the SNP has stabilised clearly in a number of months. I think we can give John Swinney a great deal of the credit for that. He's certainly focused the SNP on doing the things that matter most to the people of Scotland. He's certainly stopped a lot of the nonsense that was going on. I see that, the Daily Mail was determined to try and persuade the people of Scotland that the SNP was going to ban pet cats. John Swinney stamped on that very quickly today. I should say stamped on the accusation, not he didn't stamp on any pet cats, in case that becomes another headline in the Daily Mail. But the government has stabilised itself. The SNP government has stabilised. It's clearly making progress under its own steam. It's managed, as we discussed earlier, to secure a majority in Parliament for its budget. It's not just relying on Labour abstaining. And once again, politics seems to be working in the Scottish Parliament, and people are looking, or will be looking, to the parties that can make a difference and what that positive difference is, rather than simply complaining that it's their turn to have a shot at government, which seems to be all the Labour Party now has. So Labour, there's a number of push and pull factors there. The Tories are struggling, Labour are struggling, Reform haven't come under any serious scrutiny, but the parties that are doing their best to work constructively in the Parliament and present a positive vision of what a future Scotland could be like in terms of delivering on our public services are the ones that seem to be prospering at the moment. So I think there's a great deal of room for the SNP to try and win back trust, win back support, to build on where it is. But these polls that's now from 2 or 3 different polling companies are making increasingly grim reading, I would suggest, for the Labour Party and their hopes of cobbling together any kind of coalition post May 2026 at Holyrood.
Thanks, Richard. For our next story, a think tank research finds that nearly 1 million children in the UK are at risk of poverty due to housing costs. A new study by the Institute for Public Policy Research, IPPR, the think tank has found that nearly 1 million children in the UK are at risk of falling into poverty or will face financial hardship as a result of rising rents, shortfalls in government housing support, and underinvestment in new social housing, according to the new report. The IPPR study suggests the government's failure to commit to raising the local housing allowances, LAH, will push to 90,000 more families into financial hardship or poverty over the next year. It estimates 925,000 children are expected to be affected by shortfalls in government housing support by March 2026. LHA rates were reduced in 2011 by the coalition government so that now only families eligible for benefits living in the cheapest rental homes in their areas, properties in the bottom 30th percentile of their local rental markets, only these houses will get the cost of their rent covered in full by the government. LHA rates were also repeatedly frozen by previous Conservative governments, so that the housing allowance did not keep pace with local rents, increasing the number of families on benefits who must spend benefit income intended for their living costs on instead spending that money on rent. So far, the Labour government has not committed to ditching this freeze and raising LHA rates in April 2025, saying, with a quote here saying, if the local housing allowance doesn't keep pace with your rent, then essentially you've got less money available for food, energy, and other things, said Professor Ashwin Kumar, a co-author of the report. He said among the children in the situation, there would be some living in, quote, in or close to the poverty line. The number of children in the private rental sector has grown from 1 in 12 to 1 in 5 years over the last 20 years. I'll read it again. The number of children in the private rental sector has grown from 1 in 12 to 1 in 5 over the last 20 years, according to the report. The report also identified a concerning postcode lottery with LHA rates. Nearly two-thirds, 62% of families renting privately in Wales face a shortfall, compared with only 31% in Scotland. A government spokesperson said the following: "No person should be in poverty. That's why we've extended the Household Support Fund again. We're also maintaining discretionary housing payments and are giving an extra £233 million to councils directly for homelessness." The Scottish Government's Health Minister, Paul McLennan, has written to the UK government calling... that's the Scottish Government's Housing Minister, Paul McLennan, has written to the UK government calling on them to reverse the recent budget decision to keep rates at 2024 to 2025 levels for the coming year, further widening the gap between local housing allowance rates and real-world rents. In his letter to the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, Mr. McLennan said the following: "Whilst we will continue to do all we can to support households struggling with the impact of the freeze within devolved powers, the UK government must commit to unfreezing LHA rates. Research from the Resolution Foundation estimates that permanently repegging LHA rates to the 30th percentile of local rents would mean 75,000 fewer children in poverty by the end of the UK Parliament. This is a missed opportunity to help lift many children out of poverty." Richard, what do you make of the letter written by the Housing Minister just there, and the rest of the story as well?
Well, I think it's quite clear housing costs have for some time been a very, very significant element in housing costs. So if the support that the state is offering doesn't match the cost of housing in the housing market at large, then there's obviously going to be pressures on that. And the sad thing is that the people who are in receipt of those benefits are the least able to cope with that pressure on their budget. I mean, when you look at the cost of housing as a whole, it's astronomical in terms of rent, in terms of interest rates, and even people who are working and earning reasonable salaries are finding it very, very hard to find rents that are affordable, or even the chance to buy a rate that is affordable. And the cost of housing is not just in its own in cash terms, in real terms, but just in terms of the share of monthly income that it's taking up is certainly far greater now than it was, even 10 or certainly 20 years ago. So, for all that the Scottish Government has done what it can to mitigate those pressures through things like the Scottish Child Payment, through discretionary housing payments to end the bedroom tax, as it will do through plans to end the rape clause, it's quite clear that the cost pressures on housing are very, very high for far too many people in Scotland, and there's no one single silver bullet solution to that. We need to increase the amount of houses that are available for affordable social rents, but we also need to make sure that households have enough income from whatever sources. And while the Scottish Government is clearly doing all it can with limited resources at its disposal to do that, it's quite clear that that there's more needs to be done, and much of that comes down to what the government in Westminster is prepared either to do or what it chooses not to do.
Thank you, Richard. Taking a look over at the US, where US aid headquarters closed and workers told to stay home, according to reports. The Washington, D.C. headquarters of the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, is USAID is reported to be closed today, with workers being told to stay at home as Donald Trump's administration takes further steps to shut down USAID. Agency staff received late-night emails on Sunday telling them not to come to work in the morning, according to DevEx, a media platform for the global development community, which first reported the move. It came less than 24 hours after two top security officials at USAID, the world's largest single donor of foreign aid, were suspended after they tried to stop representatives of Elon Musk's so-called Department of Government Efficiency, also known as DOGE, from gaining access to restricted parts of the building. This morning, Elon Musk posted on X that the president agreed with his proposal to close down USAID, which manages almost $43 billion in food, humanitarian, and other aid to about 130 countries. Billionaire Musk, who has repeatedly called USAID a criminal organization that is beyond repair, said he had discussed with Trump in detail his plan for closing it, and that the president had agreed. USAID is the world's largest single donor in fiscal is world's largest single donor. In fiscal year 2023, the U.S. disbursed $72 billion of assistance worldwide on everything from women's health in conflict zones to access to clean water, HIV/AIDS treatments, energy security, and anti-corruption work. It provided 42% of all humanitarian aid tracked by the United Nations in 2024. Trump has ordered a global freeze on most U.S. foreign aid as part of his America First policy that is already sending shockwaves around the world. Field hospitals in Thai refugee camps, landmine clearance in war zones, and drugs to treat millions suffering from diseases such as HIV are among the programs at risk of elimination. Workers for DOGE, Musk's unofficial government department with no congressionally approved mandate, have also gained access to the U.S. Treasury's highly sensitive database and federal payment system, according to Wired magazine. Wired reported that the DOGE team is being led by a group of 6, quote, young and inexperienced engineers aged 19 to 24, one of whom is still in college. The decision by the new Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, to allow DOGE, quote, full access to the personal data of millions of Americans, as well as details of public contractors who compete directly with Musk's own businesses, has raised conflict of interest concerns. No one elected Elon Musk, as Donald Trump allows Musk to access people's personal information and shut down government funding. Republicans in Washington will also own the consequences, said the Democratic Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren, writing on X. Adding to that, we must do everything in our power to push back and protect people from harm. A pretty complicated situation here, especially for some of the workers of some of these departments that are being asked to pass over information that they don't know if they're allowed to pass on and what to do with. How do you see those playing out as time goes on? Is there going to be backlash within American legal systems?
Well, you imagine there would be. Rule of law still exists in the United States, and I would imagine that you cannot just sack people or do away with government departments without having the appropriate governmental approvals, and presidential edicts are not immune from challenge in the courts. So even with a Supreme Court that is heavily loaded towards the Republican sympathies, I would still expect that there will be a number of these edicts boomerang back on the Trump administration as they find out it's not quite as easy to do things as they may have suggested. But no, I don't believe that Elon Musk is going to do anything. I don't think he's going to make much of a dent. He's going to cause a lot of chaos. in the short term, perhaps in the medium term, but in terms of the long term impact that this has, I think he's just another big mouth who talks about how, with his private sector background, he can bring efficiencies to the public sector, who will find out that who fails miserably because it's a damn sight more complicated than doing that. And I think that most government, all government departments are there for a reason. They do things for a reason. If you no longer wish them to do these things, then that's fine. But it's very rare that you will find a private sector entity that will do them instead, or that they can be done away with entirely. So efficiencies are usually found incrementally. It's not about taking a chainsaw to things, as Javier Milei in Argentina might have it. And personally, I can't wait to see Elon Musk fall flat in his face, because as we've seen with his efforts at his hell site, the hell site formerly known as Twitter, he certainly seems to have chopped a lot of cost out of that where he had the mandate to do so, but he's done nothing to boost revenues, and it's still losing every bit as much money as it was. Government's a hell of a lot more complicated than running a website or trying to build cars or trying to fire things into space. And I think he's going to find that out very soon. And I can't wait to hear the excuses starting to come when he dies on his arse trying to do it.
I see. So potentially a short stint for dark Gothic MAGA, as Elon Musk would put it. For our last story of the day, we've got the National Museum of Scotland opening its COVID-19 vaccine exhibition. Injecting Hope, the race for a COVID-19 vaccine, an exhibition telling the story of a global effort to develop a COVID-19 vaccine, is open now at the National Museum of Scotland. The Injecting Hope exhibition explores the scientific principles and adaptation of innovative research behind the extraordinary endeavour. It looks at the behind-the-scenes work that accompanied the vaccine's rapid development, production, transport, and delivery, and examines the sheer logistical challenges behind the worldwide rollout, revealing the inspiring stories of scientists and innovators collaborating around the globe to find solutions and save lives. The exhibition shows how these people have shaped the world we live in today, showcasing more than 80 objects and stories that were collected during the peak of the pandemic. It features artwork, interactives, and personal objects examining everything from the virus itself to the work done behind the scenes by volunteers and researchers. Richard, what sort of role do you think an exhibition like this will play?
Well, my own thought on it, in terms of my personal feelings, is that it's still just a little bit too close to comfort. We look to museums to show us historical artifacts, and while I would expect an exhibition like this to come in time, it feels a little bit soon for me anyway. But no, in terms of placing vaccines in their historical context, explaining the science and recording, perhaps for the first time in some kind of considered way, the very recent history that we've all lived through. I think it's quite interesting, but I'm not quite sure it will be top of my list of things to see next time I'm in Edinburgh. But no, I suppose it had to be done at some point for the first time. It's being done here. I'm sure it will be done with great care, and it's important that it's there and it's curated and can be there for future generations as well, in future exhibitions in future years. But as I say, I think it's probably just a little bit too close to the bone for a lot of people at this point in time. Although, if you can set that to one side, the science and the history and the first draft of history that it gives us, I think will be fascinating. Of that, there's no doubt.
Well, thank you very much, Richard Thomson, for providing us with your insight today. That's former SNP MP for Govan. And with that, we will be wrapping up I mispronounced the place that you were in P4. Could you just repeat it for me? For Gordon, that's right. That's for Gordon. Well, thank you for being a part of the show, Richard Thomson. And with that, we will be wrapping up for this evening. Thank you to our guests again. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make regular monthly payments, thank you very much. We've raised £20,000 from April to the end of 2024, £16,000 short of our £36,000 target. We had to borrow £12,000 to enable us to pay our bills and survive, but the pressure is still on, and we need to find enough regular donors to give us financial security. We face costs of over £4,000 every month, but only receive donations of around £2,500. We need more regular subscribers, but we need to clear our debts as well. Our programs will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, and please donate whatever you can afford. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.